Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here, ready to cover yet another chapter in fighting game history. One sub-series we have looked at installments from recently is the Street Fighter EX trilogy, the Street Fighter franchise's first foray into the world of 3D polygon gaming. I have already uploaded in-depth retrospectives on the first two games in the series, so now it is finally time to look at the game's third entry. Overall, the Street Fighter EX series is a selection of fighting games the general gaming population seem to rarely acknowledge. However, out of the three titles, this entry seems to be the most overlooked of all. Looking at comments left on my previous videos, it appears though that many people were not even aware that the series made it up to a third installment. But with all this said, does the game deserve its lack of visibility today? Let us find out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Street Fighter EX3 and why nobody played it. To understand how we got to EX3, let's first briefly recap as to why the other games in the series were released. Back in 1996, many franchises throughout gaming were changing gameplay and presentation styles, opting for newly popular 3D graphics. Capcom were not confident that they could do the Street Fighter series justice when using such style, so opted to release the next mainline entry in the series, Street Fighter 3, in a more traditional 2D. Former Capcom employee and member of the Street Fighter 2 development team, Akira Nishitani, had other ideas though, which would result in him and his company Eureka co-producing his own Street Fighter game with Capcom. This title would of course be Street Fighter EX, featuring 3D polygons and be developed to run on Sony ZN arcade hardware. This would result in the game being easily ported to the Sony PlayStation, giving the game a much wider audience than what was available with Street Fighter 3. Street Fighter EX sold well enough to deem the title worthy of a sequel, so 2 years later, in 1998, Street Fighter EX2 would hit the arcades. Whilst the first EX game was a breath of fresh air for the franchise, the second installment offered very little in terms of new features. A dash of new fighting mechanics were added, graphics were slightly improved, and a couple of new characters were added too, but all in all it was simply much of the same. The third game in the series, Street Fighter EX3, would arrive yet another 2 years later in the year 2000. We have a lot to talk about this game, but first let's check out the game's introduction.
Street Fighter EX3.
From the game's introduction, you would have instantly noticed that graphically, the visuals in the game were a massive step up from Street Fighter EX2, and the duel that ensues between Ken and palette swap Ken looks graphically more impressive than ever before. As you can see from the character select screen, EX3 features a sizable roster of fighters, with a lot of different characters to choose from. Including unlockables, this game features 28 different fighters, which is a decent amount. Like previous EX games, the characters mix a range of fighters from the classic Street Fighter games together with a bunch of characters created by Eureka for this series. This of course includes everybody's favourite Eureka fighter, Skullomania. Outside of just the graphical improvements, the title marks a number of changes for the series. The first of which being that the game was released on the Sony PlayStation 2, which straight away explains the huge graphical improvements over the game's predecessor. More interestingly, unlike other fighting games I've covered on this channel, this game is an exclusive and only appeared on the PS2 and no other platforms. The game did not see even an arcade release, meaning that this was the first game featuring Street Fighter characters that could only be experienced in the homes. I guess this was because by the time the PS2 was launched, arcades were slowly becoming less and less relevant, and Sony was set to make so much money from the PlayStation 2 that bothering much with arcade hardware at that time would have been a trivial pursuit at best. Still though, Capcom fighters that year remained in arcades, with Marvel vs Capcom 2 and Capcom vs SNK both seeing releases on the Dreamcast arcade counterpart, the Sega Naomi, around the same time frame. The Dreamcast really was the last console ever made that featured the old school mentality of bringing the arcade experience home. With regards to EX3 though, like other titles in the series, the game is yet another 2D head-to-head fighting game, featuring 3D polygon graphics. The game would see release in Japan in March of the year 2000, October 2000 in North America as a launch title for the PS2, and the game would reach Europe in March of 2001. Whilst graphics in the game have been massively improved, many of the mechanics found in Street Fighter EX2 have been directly carried over to this game. In these regards, both super combos and meteor combos make a return. A big change though is that guard breaks have been completely removed from the EX franchise, and instead a similar system known as surprise blows has been implemented in its place. The game also features momentary combos, which enable combinations of moves to be started, switched and restarted, kind of like a super cancel. Many characters also have new moves, including Skullomania himself, who now has a vertical projectile. The game's main play mode is known as Original Mode, and is drastically different from anything found in either of the previous EX games. After selecting a character, you quickly find yourself in a 3-on-1 encounter, an interesting concept which I'm surprised took this long to be placed within a Street Fighter game. After winning this bout, you then earn the opportunity to recruit one of your former opponents to your team, which you guessed it, the game features traditional tag team matches. Players, insert Teddy Long joke here. Tag team fighting was getting hot within the fighting game genre during this period, as demonstrated in previous videos on this channel. The Capcom Versus series was in full swing by this point, and rival schools received moderate success too, so I guess it just made sense to add this feature into the Street Fighter EX series. In terms of the tag feature, the game introduces a mechanic known as the Critical Parade, which consists of your tag team partner battling your opponent alongside you simultaneously for a few seconds upon calling them, a rule taken straight from the Pro Wrestling Tag Team playbook. Anyway, during Original Mode, after every encounter you have the opportunity to recruit opponents and can recruit up to 3 different partners as you make progress through this 6-bout quest. These fights are a mixture of different stipulation matches, from tag team bouts to team battles, and as mentioned earlier, even 2-on-1 and 3-on-1 matches. The variation from encounter to encounter makes me wonder whether the Street Fighter EX3 team took inspiration from the success of Super Smash Bros. Of the Nintendo 64, which had been released in the previous year of 1999. The final stage of Original Mode places you in a 1-on-1 encounter with classic Street Fighter II boss M. Bison. Upon defeating him though, the end credits themselves deliver a slice of uniqueness by acting as a sort of bonus stage, if you will. As the credits scroll, you are rewarded with an infinite combo meter and have the opportunity to take down as many weak generic fighters as possible. This is the equivalent of Stone Cold Steve Austin taking on the current WWE roster. In fact, 6 or 7 of these are normally on screen against you at the same time, leaving plenty of room for some chaotic fun here. Within Original Mode, there are also secondary objectives, which the player can complete in order to gain platinum, gold, silver and bronze trophies, which in turn unlock various features. These additional challenges give the game an element of single-player replayability that was not necessarily there with the first two games in the series. Aside from original mode, other fighting modes in the game allow you to set up tag team matches, team battles, and even 4-player matches at will, allowing for a lot of options, especially when indulging in multiplayer fun. Outside of all of these play modes, the other standout feature to the game is the character edit mode, which is an extension to the game's expert mode, a play mode that had appeared in the first EX games previously. In this mode, you play as Ace, a fairly generic looking fighter who is somewhat of a blank slate in that he has no special moves whatsoever. Special moves and super combos are required for Ace as you progress through this play mode. The moves can be purchased through the use of points, which are earned via completing achievement-like tasks such as performing a 3-hit combo or executing a combo that does over 90 points of damage, for example. Ace is a playable character in other modes in the game and becomes more and more useful depending on how much you have been grinding within this section of the game. So, as you can see from what we have covered so far, it looks like at the very least Arika were attempting to make an effort with the EX series and attempting to do things with the game they had not tried out previously. Now, with this knowledge in mind, let us take a look at how this unique game was received by journalists at the time. Yeah. GameSpot stated that Street Fighter EX3 takes the gameplay and additional moves of EX2, adds a tag team element similar to that of Capcom's own Marvel vs. Capcom, and drops it onto the PlayStation 2 for a quick and dirty fighting game that seems a little rushed, but still manages to be a lot of fun. While the character graphics used in EX3 look pretty amazing when standing still, the animation is the same as it was in EX2. Granted, you can't exactly add lots of frames to all the special moves and keep the game's timing as faithful to the Street Fighter series as EX3 is. But now that the 3D Street Fighters don't look all blocky and pixelated, the jerky animation really stands out. The music, however, doesn't always fit the action. Also, in an annoying demonstration of audio streaming, the music changes tunes on the fly when other characters get tagged in, so you never listen to one song for long. One track fades into another as soon as the action on the screen dictates a change. Street Fighter EX3 is the game that EX2 should have and probably would have been had this kind of hardware power been available sooner. The tag team fighting adds a nice new element that the previous game totally lacked. EX3 may feel a bit rushed in some spots, but overall it's a fun and great looking fighting game that won't disappoint long-time EX fans. So as you can see, GameSpot had some mixed thoughts on the game generally, praising the gameplay mechanics but criticising the animation and music, all in all resulting in them giving a pretty average score of 7.4 for the game. IGN's perspective of the game though seems to be a little more negative, with them stating in their opening paragraph that Street Fighter EX3 comes with little fanfare. It's a mixed bag of good multiplayer action and a few luscious special effects, but uninspired basic combat coupled with stiff controls. It's certainly not the best of the series. In a nutshell, EX3 is 3D Street Fighter with tag team combat and multiplayer capabilities. The game uses some of the PlayStation 2's massive polygonal power, but rarely ever scratches the surface, even though it's probably the best looking of the three in the series. EX3 simply feels rushed, uninspired and downright mediocre. Although players might be instantly dazzled with the size and look of the Street Fighter characters, once you take a deep look at them, the honeymoon quickly ends. Simple shaded characters that depend on boxy frames and bright colours simply don't do the imaginative former 2D characters any justice. All in all, Street Fighter EX3 keeps the tradition going, but not at its peak. Character response time isn't great, even with the power of the PS2. It seems that the response time in a game such as Street Fighter Alpha 3 is better. The characters are all stiff and mechanical in movement. With the increased technical features of the PS2, most people would conclude that lighting quick movement and blindingly fast attacks would make this Street Fighter the best in the EX3 series, but that's far from the case. The character design and overall level of detail leaves much to be desired too. In the end, Street Fighter EX3 is a middle-of-the-road fighter that lacks pizzazz and inspiration. Some reception elsewhere for the game was more pleasant than what IGN brought to the table though, with game critics stating that it had a group of pleasantly complex battlers that are very distinct in both visual and play design, adding variety and flavour to the mix. The variances in philosophy and conceptualization are extremely refreshing, adding that the interestingly offbeat touches are far superior to the dull and ugly side of the spectrum found in Street Fighter 3. Nobody liked that game at the time. Yeah. CNET would add that the tag team fighting adds a nice new element that the previous game totally lacked. EX3 may feel a bit rushed in some spots, but overall it's a fun and great looking fighting game that won't disappoint. Spong would praise the title, stating that it was a game of skill, practice and timing, and that it had nice features and fantastic special effects. They summarised it as one game that deserves taking a look at, whether you're a fan of the series or not. So from all of this, as you can see, opinions were fairly mixed on the quality of Street Fighter EX3. The game certainly has its pros and cons to it. However, aside from everything else, I think there is one major reason that few people remember playing this game. Aside from the fact that there were probably over 20 fighting games that contained Street Fighter characters by this point in time, and people were generally a bit fed up with Street Fighter by the year 2000, the game was massively overshadowed by others, with one game in particular we will get to in a minute. The Street Fighter diehard fans had generally found a deep appreciation for Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, Marvel vs Capcom 2 and Capcom vs SNK by that point. All great fighting games with 2D graphics that offered a quick response time for competitive play. So what was left of the Street Fighter fandom had moved on to those games. The fact that Street Fighter now had 3D graphics had already wowed people the moment the release of the first Street Fighter EX game occurred. So all this game really had that was new to the public was 3D Street Fighter with tag team mechanics added. The big issue here though was that if someone wanted a great fighting game that offered 3D polygons and tag team action, then the perfect game was already launched alongside the PlayStation 2 in the form of Tekken Tag Tournament. As mentioned multiple times before on this channel, the PlayStation brand was the most popular entity in console gaming of the time, and the Tekken franchise was the most popular fighting game with the mass public over the period too. Meaning that when Joe Public picked up a PS2 for the first time, they were highly likely to pick up Tekken Tag Tournament with it. Most people are not interested in procuring more than one new fighting game at a time, so Street Fighter EX3 was left on shelves in place of the much more popular Tekken game. Apart from being a more popular brand at the time, the new Tekken game got better review scores across the board than that of EX3, so the game was outmatched and outperformed on every level, finally bringing the Street Fighter EX series to a permanent close. Still though, the game does some interesting things, and was certainly the best looking 3D Street Fighter game right up until the release of Street Fighter 4, a game you could argue that it even influenced in a number of ways. For Eureka though, they have somewhat returned to form as of late, with beloved characters such as Skullomania returning in their 2018 game Fighting EX Layer, which is the spiritual successor to Street Fighter EX3. Past this point, Eureka even developed the new Nintendo Switch smash hit Tetris 99, the addictive new Tetris game with added battle royale mechanics. The company are doing well today, and all of this started thanks to the successes of the original Street Fighter EX series, so the game's legacies live on in many ways. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of Street Fighter EX3 and why nobody played it. They basically just wanted to play Tekken Tag Tournament instead. Let me know in the comment section if you were one of the minority owners of this game and what you thought of it at the time. If you like this video, I produce new videos on fighting game history every Thursday on this channel, so make sure you like, comment and subscribe in order to never miss a video. Finally, my channel is partially funded by the generous donations I receive via Patreon. Patrons can earn a credit and a shout out at the end of these videos. These people make working full time on YouTube just that little bit easier, so I'd like to thank you all for that very much. Huge thanks and shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, JD Robbins, Since Spaces, Andrew Bazanski, Asobi Kwang DX, Michael Baker, Tom Elliott, Computer Man, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Daniel Daly, RetroReversing.com, House of a Ted, Dan Barlow Jr., Joel, and all of my other patrons. Yeah, cheerio.